Today we talk about Conflict of Heroes Awakening the Bear 2nd edition. I already filmed a video about this edition. That was an unboxing video in which I showed you the components, and components are an important element of this new edition because they have been upgraded. Everything just looks more beautiful now than it used to. The colors are more vivid, the maps are stunning. The rulebook and the scenario book have been redesigned, the cards have been redesigned. Everything just looks beautiful. So much so that you may consider purchasing this edition just for the new components, even if you already own the old edition. Rules-wise, not much changed here. The only change really is that now it costs us 2 action points to fire outside of the vehicles, arc of fire with a turreted vehicle. As you can see, this is a very specific thing. It only applies to turreted vehicles, so there aren't even vehicles in all the scenarios. Very specific and not even easy to spot if you read the rulebook, because the rulebook still says 1 action point as it used to. The player aid says 2 action points. I checked with the designer, who confirmed that the rulebook has an errata there. It is 2 action points. So turrets are just a little less mobile than they used to be. In any case, there's also another interesting thing here, which is 5 new firefights, 5 new scenarios that have been added to the scenario book. In the rest of my video, in the main chunk of the rest of my video, I'm going to show you a quick overview of these scenarios, and then we can come back here and we can try to draw some conclusions about this edition. This is the map, or better I should say maps, for the first scenario. It is called Red Ice. It takes place in winter and at night. I haven't set up the game, but the German player sets up by placing his units in this area here, and the Soviet player or players will control 2 Soviet groups. One entering the game from here and that one entering from here. These 2 groups can be controlled by a single player, or 2 players can control a group each. Therefore, this is a scenario that can be easily played by 3 players. The scenario, as I said, takes place at night, so that because of this, the maximum line of sight for all units is of 5 axes, which of course gives an advantage to the Soviet units that can sneak close to the German positions without being exposed to fire from the German machine guns for too long. On the other hand, you must imagine that the battlefield is covered in snow, and because of this, moving around is problematic. And there are indeed specific movement values and defense values that apply to this scenario only. You must refer to these 2 tables here, not only to the usual movement and defense tables on the player aid. And as you can see, moving is more complicated now. It is more expensive in terms of action points to move in the open and in light and heavy woods. Also, the defense modifier for being targeted when one is in the open is of -1, whereas usually the modifier for the open is 0. Well, there's no modifier, but I guess that now the idea is that you're slowed down by the snow as you're moving in the snow, and because of this you make an easier target. And by the way, what the Soviet groups are trying to do here is to take control of some objective axes which are placed in the area where the German player deploys. Victory points are assigned for elimination of enemy units and control of objective axes. This is the map for Firefight 13 in the Firefight book. This is called Smolensk's Breakout, but it is the second of the new Firefight and the 2nd edition of Awakening the Bear. This firefight is played on a single map, so the play area is smaller than the one that you had in the previous scenario, but not so much so, because in the previous firefight only part of the 2 maps really only part of the two maps really was the center of the action. Most of the action still took place on one of the two maps. Here again we have the Germans being the defenders, and they deploy in this area here. They also have a machine gun that sets up here. And what the Germans are trying to do now is to defend this crossroad here and this crossroad here. These are the objective axes that are worth victory points to the side controlling them. This is another scenario that is based only on infantry. The Soviets will enter from this edge here and from this edge here, and there will be Soviet forces entering the board in round 1 and round 2 and round 3. So the Germans will have to hold the ground against these successive waves of enemies. Things will become easier for the Germans in round 3 when the Germans will receive reinforcements from this edge here and from this edge here. That also means that the Soviet player really needs to make some significant gain in the two initial rounds of the firefight, because when the German reinforcements enter the board, things of course are going to be much tougher for the Soviet player. Third new firefight in the second edition of Awakening the Bear. Again, this one is played on a single map. It will feature German defenders. This time the Germans set up in this area here, and the Germans are trying to protect two supply depots that will be represented by objective markers placed here and here. The Germans start with only infantry type units on the board, but the Germans have some defensive advantages because they can count on 2 barbed wires, 2 roadblocks, and 6 hidden landmines that they can place on the board at the beginning of the game. The Soviets will attack with a group of forces that will include infantry units and vehicles, so there's an advantage there for the Soviets. However, the Germans will receive reinforcements in round 4, and those reinforcements will include vehicles too. So the overall narrative and pace of the scenario is not too different from the one that you had in the previous firefight. The main difference here really being in the interaction between units and defensive elements such as barbed wire and landmines. Fourth firefight, the one that is played on the smallest surface. So far only half of a map is used, and this map is crowded with stone buildings that the Soviet player is trying to defend. The Soviet player will set up his units on this side of the road and will try to retain control of the stone buildings on that side of the road. At the beginning of the scenario, the Soviet player also will get to place 4 hasty defenses and 6 hidden landmines on the board. And the German player will then start attacking, moving from this side here. The German has a good number of units, and those units also include 2 pioneer units that can use flamethrower attacks, at least until the flamethrowers run out of fuel, which may happen during the game. It is a game that is played on a smaller area than the previous scenarios. Nevertheless, do not expect to see less action here, because the overall number of units involved in the fight is pretty much the same. It's definitely comparable with the number of units that you had in previous scenarios that were played in a larger area. So the resulting feeling to me was one of actually more intense fighting, more gruesome, more brutal fighting, with a certain distinctive feel of claustrophobia because of all the fight that goes on inside and around these buildings here. This scenario is called Bbeck Valley. It is played on a fairly large play area. The Germans place their unit on this half map of the board at the beginning of the game. The Soviet player defends in this area here, sets up here, and also can place some units in hidden mode at the beginning of the scenario, and the Soviet player also can place up to 20 points worth of fortifications on the map at the beginning of the game. If landmines are selected, they can be hidden on the board. And what the Soviet player is trying to do with this elaborate setup is to protect this hex here, which contains an objective that is worth victory points for the side that controls that hex. This is a scenario that is remarkable for the player that it has, but even more than that, to me, for the variety of interactions that you have. It is a scenario that features a really nice variety of different types of units, from regular infantry, pioneers, infantry guns, and vehicles. Really interesting, really fun stuff. Scenarios are from small to medium. There isn't anything epic that has been added to the firefight book. They play fast, usually in around an hour or less if a winner emerges early on, which is entirely possible in some cases. They're all based on a pretty strong attacker-defender dichotomy, with variations around that recipe. Sometimes you have vehicles, sometimes terrain plays a different role because of fortifications and obstacles. But overall, there is a sort of like family resemblance that connects the new scenario. So I personally enjoy to alternate such type of scenarios with scenarios that have more of a dynamic situation, but this is a minor thing. This isn't even a complaint, it is a footnote, because the scenarios as they are fun, are solid, are exciting to play, which to me is pretty much all that matters. So, in conclusion, this definitely is an excellent product. The second edition of Awakening the Bear looks beautiful. It comes with a lot of scenarios, old and new. The old ones, the designer has assured me, have been tweaked for balance, because I know that balance was a concern for some players of the first edition. That shouldn't be the case anymore, even though I haven't played those scenarios yet. I haven't replayed the old scenarios that I knew from the previous edition. But I have had fun with the new ones. I have enjoyed looking at the phenomenal beauty of the components. If you already own the first edition of Conflict of Heroes, you probably already considering purchasing the second one, in which case I hope that my video provided you with enough information to make up your mind one way or the other. If you have never played any games in the Conflict of Heroes system, then I believe that this is a perfect starting point.